Vladimir Putin is out of options. Ukraine now is striking deeper than ever within Russian territory. At the same time, the Russian economy is crumbling. And the Russian military? It has been decimated. And now, Putin is running out of places to hide. But today marks something even more decisive, because on August 6th, a U.S. envoy landed in Moscow. And with him, he brought a very singular message: cut a deal now or lose your last economic lifeline. It appears at this point that Donald Trump has had enough of Putin's games. Remember, just days ago, Trump gave Putin a 50-day deadline. Now it's been slashed to just 10 days as a visceral response to Putin's latest missile strikes. This is no longer diplomacy. This is, in fact, a high-stakes showdown. On one side, we have Putin's collapsing regime. On the other side, we have Trump's sanctions hammer. And the cost of blinking? The cost is the war itself. Whoever wins this game of chicken, Putin or Donald Trump, will determine the outcome of this war. But that pressure is very clear from the first images that were released of today's meeting in the Kremlin. Trump's envoy, billionaire Steve Witkoff, walked side by side with Kirill Dmitriev. He's one of Putin's shadow fixers. And it looked just like a normal photo op, but behind closed doors, Witkoff met directly with Vladimir Putin. Now, Kremlin aides have said very little about what occurred. However, Yuri Ushakov did confirm not only the meeting, but also the agenda, saying that first and foremost, it would be about the Ukrainian crisis, he referred to it as, and secondly, the possibility of new U.S.-Russian strategic cooperation. But then he said something sort of strange, almost opaque. He went on to say that there was, quote, from our side, certain signals were conveyed on the Ukrainian issue. Continuing that, quote, corresponding signals were also received from President Trump. What this really sounds like is stalling. In fact, rather than say that a deal was made or that there was great cooperation, they talked about signals being sent. That doesn't sound like they're going to make a deadline, which is set to expire in the coming hours. Now, publicly, the Kremlin still claims this dialogue they had today was, quote, constructive. But what really happened behind the closed doors? What is really behind that calm exterior? And the truth is, the panic is obvious. And while Moscow delays, Ukraine is now making advances. And in the next few minutes, you understand why Ukraine's deepest drone strikes of the war are still coming, why Russia's cities are cracking their pressure, and why Vladimir Putin himself may now realize that his back is against the wall. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post, and I've spent 20 years studying the Putin regime, the topic of my master's and my PhD dissertations. But more than just writing, I actively worked against the Putin regime, which is why I was blacklisted for life from entering Russia back in 2010. What is transpiring now within Russia, within the Kremlin, is absolutely fascinating. Facing the Ukrainian strikes and Trump's threats, the Kremlin is bluffing. It's trying to buy some time for peace because it knows if all of this comes together, if the West decides to really close down the Kremlin, they can do it. So soon we're going to learn, though, if the Americans are calling out their Russian counterparts' bluff, or if they're going to just let Moscow get off the hook, or if they're going to buy Moscow's latest attempt to delay peace by offering a, quote, air truce, which would just halt the aerial strikes, but not the ground war. Keep in mind, this is the exact same trick that Putin used in Syria and in the Donbass. But this time around, Ukraine isn't biting, which reminds me of a different topic. Speaking of aerial things, drones. I have very good news for you. We have reached our fundraising goal. We have surpassed 75,000 euros for life-saving drones for Ukrainian soldiers. As a result of your hard work, the men of the 501st, the 505th, and the 225th have already thanked you for your support. And today, even better news, we picked up yet more drones, and they're currently in the back of a truck on their way to Donbass. And I'll let you, in this very brief clip, hear from our friends themselves as they say thank you for your support.
Hi guys, and here we are at the United Unmanned Systems assembly location with 200 drones for the first Corps Azov of the National Guard of Ukraine, which will be delivered next day, funded by donations of Jason J. Smart YouTube community. We are with Petro, who is assembly chief at the United Unmanned Systems, and together we're strong.
Together we are strong.
Thank you everybody who chose to donate. If you'd still like to donate, I'll put the link to donate in the PayPal or via the bank in the first comment below, which I will also pin so you can easily find it. So Russia, as usual, claims that everything's going well. It claims that it's not worried about anything that's happening. But inside of Russia, it tells a very different story. Because right now, Vladimir Putin is bleeding oil. Now keep in mind that petroleum accounts for 40 to 45% of Russia's national budget. New U.S. sanctions, they could very realistically wipe that lifeline out completely. So first we must understand that Russia's war, it runs on oil exports, but more than that, how those exports are done. So they're typically done with these tankers with the false flags, with their GPS disabled, and they have their hidden cargo routed through different shadow ports. But Trump's message is very clear. Reject a ceasefire, and those tankers, they're next. Now, the new bipartisan bill, it's locked and loaded. Now, this bill, which is called the Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025, would allow the president a free hand to slap 500% tariffs on any country that still buys the Kremlin's oil. And that includes China and India. Now, Donald Trump himself recently observed that if, quote, if oil drops $10 more, Russia won't have a choice, end quote. Moscow initially rejected Washington's terms. But inside the Kremlin itself, the fear is growing. The panic is very real. Russia's financial system is simply hemorrhaging. The ruble itself is unstable. The bond yields are surging. And the elites themselves understand what's coming next. And though many people might argue that Trump won't follow through, that he'll just change his mind, which he is prone to do, or he'll just stall, or he'll backtrack, there are many who might disagree. Leading energy expert Thomas O'Donnell would be one of those people. He argues that these sanctions are engineered to permanently cripple Russia's oil exports, not just to reduce them, not end them, but for good. But the plan is very simple, he argues. Flood the market with allied surplus, that is, from friends in the United States, and with American oil. This would also allow the enforcement of secondary sanctions, and it would block Russia from finding new buyers. This wouldn't just restrict revenue. It would destroy the very industry Putin uses to fuel war, and the very means by which he projects power. For the U.S., this would be a positive. It's energy dominance in action. It secures the market share, it reshapes global oil flows, and it punishes Putin with the same tool he once tried to weaponize. Now, with this sort of a coordination, it would change everything globally of how oil is dealt with. The U.S. is definitely positioned to gain from this economically, and it would definitely strip Russia of its most strategic asset. But oil is just the beginning of Vladimir Putin's disaster. Over the past nights, Ukraine has escalated its strikes. On August 6th, Ukraine launched its deepest drone attack of the war. 5 regions were hit: Bryansk, Rostov, Voronezh, Crimea, and Oryol. In Bryansk alone, explosions tore through the fuel depots and the radar hubs. Fires burned for hours. Now, Russia claimed that it was able to shoot down 51 drones, but the destruction was very clear. It was impossible to hide. This is no longer just about tactical warfare. It's different. At this point, it's about strategic collapse. And what's incredible is that throughout Russia right now, we see confusion. We see that just yesterday, the FSB reportedly stopped an assassination attempt on a defense industry executive in Belgrade. That's not a frontline target. That's Russia's core. And it's important to keep in mind that it's not just the military that's collapsing. Russia's economy itself is in freefall. Oil and gas revenues for July are down 27% year over year. Energy, its income for the state is down 19% year over year. Ukraine's drone strikes in Novorossiysk have crippled one of Russia's last viable export ports. And now the EU is cutting the price cap on Russia's crude. Now it's only going to be $47.60 a barrel. And that's projected to slash Moscow's revenues by $18.75 billion for the year. But that's not all. It's the Ukrainian attacks that are truly destroying the oil industry. Consider this. The attack the other day on Razan, that oil refinery is pretty important. It, in fact, made the diesel that's used for the freight trains. But now, without that, there is a shortage of diesel inside of Russia. So much so, and it's become so expensive, that the freight trains are no longer turning profit. Incredibly enough, workers at Russia's rail lines have been told they have to take 2 days off a month unpaid because the state cannot meet payroll. So what we're seeing evolve here is not just oil refineries being destroyed, but Russia's logistics network breaking from the inside. This is a long choke, not a short squeeze. And Trump's sanctions would strike a system that is already crumbling. The Kremlin cannot fund this war without oil. And across Russia, cities are cracking under this pressure. Look what's happening now in Belgorod, in Kursk, in Taganrog. All saw overnight evacuations. In Voronezh, explosions have shut down tons of different businesses there. We see that blackouts have changed how people live. And Telegram is filled with images of this. The burning rail cars, destroyed substations. The war isn't just at the border. It's inside of Russia. And it's all across Russia. Behind the Ukraine precision, there's another element. And that's American surveillance. So we've seen the bombardier Challengers, the Artemis, circling the Black Sea. This is the Pentagon's most advanced spy plane. Artemis intercepts the Russian communications, and it does it in real time. That intel seems to make it into Ukrainian missile teams' hands, because it seems very often that the Ukrainians have very good insight as to what to strike and when. So we've seen that the rail hubs and the radar sites are usually hit within hours, it would appear. So whenever Russia moves, Ukraine is already waiting. Now, Ukraine is in a good situation overall. Zelensky, in fact, spoke with Trump just last week. And the agenda was drones, sanctions, and ending the war on Ukraine's terms. This wasn't about compromise. It was about leverage. Ukraine now has a path to peace, and it doesn't need Vladimir Putin's permission. So going into 4 years now of this war, Russia still has not succeeded in anything. It has not taken Donetsk. Its air defenses themselves are falling apart. And its economy is imploding. We see evacuations within Russia. We see that their ports are burning. Their intelligence is leaking. And now these newest sanctions could destroy the Putin regime forever. Trump just lit the fuse on a full spectrum pressure. The walls aren't just closing in on Putin. They're collapsing upon him. So what happens next will be interesting. But if we want to analyze correctly what will happen, we should always remember the Kremlin does not negotiate in good faith. We can be very safe to assume that they will do their best to buy time, to offer other opportunities, to offer other settings for negotiation. But very rarely will they agree to sign a paper saying they want peace. The Kremlin will try to deceive and to lie. So in the next coming hours, we will learn if Washington correctly interpreted what it is that Putin wishes to achieve and doesn't get lost, doesn't get confused by the lies emitted by the Kremlin. Thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel. And as always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.